Authorities in Bangladesh have imposed a new nationwide curfew after more than 90 people were killed and hundreds injured in a fresh wave of anti-government protests. Demonstrators are demanding that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina step down. The unrest has also prompted the government to shut down internet services.
The streets have become evidence of the anger and frustration against the government of Sheikh Hasina. Protesters are not bowing down. Clashes have spread, and the death toll is rising.
The current situation in Bangladesh and the carnage happened because of the government and their failure. They're behind all the killings. Nothing would have happened if they had acted in a just way and met the demand to reform quotas earlier. People are bitter and have their backs up against the wall.
The protesters have solidified their demands to a single point: the resignation of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. In response, the Prime Minister's Awami League party called on its supporters to take to the streets, a scenario that has resulted in massive clashes and deaths. What began as a peaceful student protest over the government job quota system has now turned into unprecedented anger at Sheikh Hasina. A hard crackdown last month that left at least 200 people dead was able to temporarily disperse the student protests. But the demonstrators are back, with wider support from civil society. Prime Minister Hasina says the protesters who engaged in quote sabotage and destruction were no longer students but criminals, and that they should be dealt with iron hands. The protesters say they will get justice only when the government falls. The deadlock has plunged Bangladesh into a dangerous phase.
Syeda Rizwana Hasan is an advocate at the Bangladesh Supreme Court in Dhaka. I asked her how challenging this crisis is for the Prime Minister.
This crisis, I think, is very challenging for her because this is the fourth time that she is in power. And the last three times, she actually did not get a chance to test her popularity because the elections were either boycotted by the main opposition or the election mechanism was set in a way that even when the opposition participated, it was not actual participation. So the 2013, 18 and 2023 elections were largely one-sided election. So now she's seeing so much of anger against her regime. She's seeing public wrath. I don't think she has seen anything of that sort in the last 16 years. So number one, she hasn't gone through a popularity test, and second, she's not actually prepared to face this sort of a public wrath, and that is already demonstrated by the fact that officially we have lost around 300 people, and when it's officially 300 people,
right,
it means the number is much higher.
And by asking her supporters to take to the streets, didn't she expect more clashes and violence?
I would say yes. That was not the most prudent thing to do. There is already police on the roads. There is already army on the road. We are still going through curfew. Now that from today, from 6 p.m. onwards, the curfew has been given for an indefinite period. But we were in curfew. So with army on the street, police on the street, all the military, paramilitary, law enforcing agencies fighting for her from the street, having to command her people, her party people to be on the street actually indicates that, we were probably inviting more civil disturbance.
Now, you know the saying, political power comes from the barrel of a gun. Does the Prime Minister, though, despite everything, still have the full support of the police and the military?
That is very difficult to answer. She definitely still has her command over the police. but the army has not been seen in their conventional role. In the previous time when we used to have martial laws and we will have army deployed on the street, that would mean that army would take control and people would actually confine themselves to their houses. But the curfew that we had, we experienced that almost everyone was out on the street and army was not interfering, was not being unnecessarily harsh or rude. And from today, it has taken a different turn altogether. Now having the army on the road with a curfew for indefinite period, and army still not using any force afresh, so shows that there has been some thinking within the army about how much loyalty to display and how much patience to really exercise in this very difficult time. So command question I can't answer with army, but I can see that although there are allegations that army in some cases are not supporting the agitating students,
right,
in most cases it is being reported that army hasn't really opened fire afresh. There was initial allegation against the army, but that's not there anymore.
Now, with demonstrators seeing more support from the wider population, I guess we've been sort of dancing around this question, but could this movement topple the government?
The movement has now given a one-point demand, and that is that the present regime will have to really go. There has to be a political conclusion to this battle. And the political conclusion, to the best of my understanding, may not be very happy for the party in regime. If not today, I don't think they'll be able to run the country the way they were running for all these years. Their authority has been challenged, their legal authority has been put to challenge, their moral authority has been seriously put to challenge. So in a situation like this, autocracy is not supposed to sustain for too long.
Syeda Rizwana Hasan in Dhaka, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Taqbir Huda is a regional researcher for Amnesty International's South Asia. Welcome to DW, sir. Protesters in Bangladesh are now calling for a countrywide disobedience movement where citizens are being asked not to pay their taxes or utility bills. How widespread and how effective would this be as a tactic?
Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to say that the death toll has actually now climbed to 43, according to Prathamala, the largest newspaper. So it's doubled in the past hour. And in terms of the civil disobedience movement, I mean, it has the potential to be extremely effective given the very volatile socioeconomic position of Bangladesh, where foreign reserves have been depleting, rising cost of living, and also migrant workers who send lucrative amounts of remittance have also mobilized to organize a remittance shutdown. So all these could really trigger a severe economic crisis in Bangladesh. And I must mention that in the history of Bangladesh's independence, it is a civil disobedience movement that led to the eventual independence of Bangladesh in 1971. So it is a deep-seated, practice within the rubric of Bangladesh.
Point well taken. Taqbir, you might call this a new wave of protests. Observers called the police's conduct before brutal. Are we seeing better conduct from authorities now?
Well, after the protesters returned to the streets in the past week, there was a period of relative calm where we didn't see much bloodshed. But today's news is, of course, very harrowing again, because we're seeing the comparable levels of killings that were in the initial stage. So we've seen reports that people are being admitted, scores of people are being admitted with bullet injuries. So my sources on the ground still say that protesters remain armed with only sticks, slingshots, and bricks. And we must remember that Bangladesh is a country where the security forces enjoy an almost total monopoly on the use of firearms. But there are reports suggesting that ruling party activists like the Bangladesh Chapter League have access to firearms. So that's very concerning as well. So we will, of course, only know the extent to which unlawful force was used once we've had a chance to verify. But for now, the reports suggest, again, an increase in the bloodshed that we've witnessed earlier as well. And we urge an an immediate end to the use of this unlawful force.
Understood. The government had promised to investigate the past crackdown of police. Has that happened, and do you trust them to do it objectively?
Well, there are, of course, significant concerns about the possibility of an independent investigation in Bangladesh. Here, I might point to the fact that the Rule of Law Index, which is a global measure, ranks Bangladesh almost at the bottom of 143 countries at 127. You know, civil society members have called for an independent UN investigation because they have no faith in a domestic judiciary. The case of Abu Said, who was the first known student to be killed, is quite telling. So it was clear from the evidence that was available because of the video that was captured that he was shot at by police. But eventually they had arrested a 16-year-old student, a high school student, accusing him of killing Abu Said. It's only after massive backlash that they eventually released him. And then yesterday they suspended 2 police officers. But that case alone was quite emblematic in the possibility of independent or impartial investigation. And I must also add that we have now seen lots of students being arrested, and so the mass arrests that we're currently seeing also affects the people's lack of trust in an independent investigation.
What I'm hearing is there is not a reservoir of trust there at all. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina requested protesters sit with her for constructive dialogue. Is there a chance for reconciliation, or are we beyond that point?
Well, if the words of the protest leaders are anything to go by, they've said the time for dialogue has ended. I mean, so they are quite adamant on their one-point demand. In fact, reconciliation would probably only be possible if a neutral, arbiter kind of oversaw the process. In fact, just today, a Bangladesh University Teachers Network published a demand for an interim governance mechanism that would be comprised of the student leaders and the protest leaders and civil society members. So it seems like, they've been very categorical. If you see their words, they are looking at this as a liberation, movement for liberation. Yeah.
Got it. That is Taqbir Huda, Amnesty International's regional researcher for South Asia. Many thanks to you, sir.
Thank you.